Hey y'all, thanks for coming to today's event. We're really excited about it because a lot of really great information. I mean, we just in the networking time had a quick conversation about how useful the book was, talking about customer discovery, and we're going to hear from the author himself today. So real quick, let's talk about our sponsors, and that happens to be actually me. I'm actually the co-founder of Product Art, so I get to talk about myself. So Product Hired, if you don't know already what it is a place to find jobs. You can get interview guides. You can, of course, get product events. We have one called Product Hired Job Club, which is a great meetup for people who are looking for jobs. And actually, Rajesh will be speaking at that next week, I believe. So definitely look on meetup.com, Product Hired Job Club, and you'll be able to find it. And so besides that, you can hire people, find jobs, we get jobs hourly. I mean, last I looked, we had about 49,000 jobs. So we have a lot. And also we have coaching, and this is something we just launched. We're really excited. There's actually 51 coaches right now on Product Hired. They can do resume reviews, portfolio reviews, career coaching, interview prep. And they set their own prices. So some of them are free, some of them are paid. So definitely check them out. And these are some of our coaches. As you will see, Rajesh is also a coach. So if you want to book some time with Rajesh, you can go ahead and do that on producthire.com. You can also be a coach. So we're also looking for coaches. So if you have experience in product and you want to be a coach, you can join these lovely people who are awesome. And you can do it for free if you just want to volunteer time and be a coach. Like, we're all for that, giving back to the community. Or, if you want to pay for your time, that's fine too. We don't judge here. So let's talk about Product Hire, back out of sponsor mode. So 11 years ago, I keep on adding a year to this every year. It's getting pretty big now. I'm gonna have to change these slides. But 11 years ago, product was really lonely. And then Product Tank was birthed. Really, we're here to help people meet and learn from each other. And so there's well over 200,000 members in 200 plus cities all over the world. And today is World Product Day. So we're all basically 24 hours of product is going on. And so, you're catching the tail end of it. I'm sure there's a few more today if you want to keep on going. The product tanks are meetups for product people by product people. They're informal and they're local. And when we say product, we mean product managers, designers, data science developers, anybody who works on a product. So while we're definitely product management heavy, we are not only product management. So all you designers, UX people, you are one of us. Don't worry. So it's networking only, lunches and happy hours. Of course, we don't have those because of COVID, but soon they will open up in Austin, and we're really excited about that. I think actually probably in August we might have our first face-to-face, and we're all going to have to get pretty and cut our hair and things like that. They're informal events, so we usually have 2 to 3 speakers. For these remote ones, we've just been doing 1. And no sales pitches. So after the sponsors, we're not selling anything. No one's trying to sell anything. We're just here to give information, share, learn, network, and have fun. We do have a Slack community. Just go to productinaustin.com and you can fill in your email and it'll send you an invite. And all the meetup groups here in town use a Slack community. It's a Slack community for Austin. So definitely join that. And give us feedback. We definitely want to know how to improve these things. I'm a bit rusty. It's the first Product Tank in quite a while. Product Tank Austin. So definitely give us feedback. bit.ly/Product Tank Austin is how you get in. So yeah, no one fills that out, but I tell you anyways. If you're hiring and finding jobs, please go to the Slack community and/or post on producthire.com. We have a bot that takes all the jobs for Austin, producthire.com, and sends them to the Slack community and other lovely little places. And you can find junior, mid-level, senior management and remote roles, and they're posted every weekday. So you can go to producthire.com, set up an alert system, or just look at the Slack, or do both. Makes me happy. We also have a job networking channel on the Slack community called Job Club. So just join that and you can talk about jobs and get all the insider tips. and let people know what you're looking for. And of course, we have Product Hire Job Club meetups for product job events. And those are twice a month. In the next run, like I said, is Rajesh is going to speak. How you can get involved. So you can share this. You can volunteer. You can apply to speak. We're always looking for speakers. And of course, when the world becomes a little bit more normal, not that it was normal in the first place, we're going to need venue hosts and sponsor hosts for happy hours and talks like that. So now with all the homework behind us, I'd love to introduce Rajesh Nerlikar, who is the Chief Product Advisor and coach at Prodify. Keep admitting people. He's the co-founder of the new best-selling product management book, Build What Matters. Rajesh has more than 15 years of product management experience. Over the past 3 years, he's advised, coached nearly 30 companies, from startup founders to growth stage product executives to entire enterprise product teams. Prior to becoming chief product advisor at Prodify, he was a technology consultant at Accenture, an entrepreneur, a product manager at OPower, a senior product manager at Hello Wallet, a director of product at Morningstar, and the interim vice president of product and design at Savonix. Hope I got that right, a Prodify client. Rajesh often helps clients recruit PMs and therefore looked at 2,000 plus resumes in 2020. And, he's a very helpful guy. So, definitely book some time with him to review your cover letter, your resume, or to get career advice on Product Hired. That was a plug, wasn't it? I shouldn't have done that. Anyways, he also mentors at Texas McCombs MBAs and tries to help PMs trying to break in to their career. So thank you, Rajesh. You're going to be talking about best practices for customer discovery interviews. And I am handing this off to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark, and excited to be here on World Product Day. Thank you all for making the time. Ty, thank you for joining at what I think is midnight in Europe or close to it. Excited to be here. Can everyone see the deck? Okay. I will actually ask if you're okay to turn your videos back on, because one of the downsides of doing a bunch of Zoom talks is it's really, really hard to gauge where people are feeling or where their questions are coming from. So if you feel comfortable, please turn the video back on. I've got two screens going here, so I can kind of see y'all's reactions as I talk as well. So for today, I wanted to do a deep dive on the intro and sort of set the context on where all these best practices came from. Talk about why you should even do customer discovery interviews, dive into some of the best practices that I've learned from my own time and then working with a bunch of companies and seeing how clients are doing customer discovery. We're going to do a live discovery interview, mostly because this is like a very nuanced topic. And unless you kind of get to experience it and talk about it, there's not a lot of great practice opportunities. And then I'll leave time at the end for questions, although I did try to bake in a bunch of time between each of these sections. So I'll pause between each of the sections with hopefully we can do one or two questions as we move along. All right, cool. A little bit more about my background. So, I've been in Austin, started in Austin, went to college down here. As Mark said, I worked at Accenture for 5 years down here in Austin in their government practice. I actually started as a software engineer and architect and then moved into a business analyst role. And that was kind of my first step into product, kind of old school waterfall development. So I've been doing it for more than 15 years now. Wasn't sure about Accenture, so I went to business school up at Michigan Ross, and I used that to transition into the world of startups. In my first year, worked for a student-run company called Hitchsters in the online travel space, and we got acquired after we graduated. And then second year, I started a company with a classmate called TerraPerks. Our mission was to encourage people to make sustainable decisions every day. And our first product was a Facebook app that lets you compare your energy usage to friends and family. And so spent about 1.5 years trying to sell that to utility companies and home energy professionals. And then I got engaged and realized I needed a salary. And so I moved out to DC and joined a company called OPower that was doing something very similar in the residential energy efficiency space. If you've ever gotten an energy report that shows how your usage compares to your neighbors, that was the OPower product that I worked on. OPower went public about 7 years ago, and I was there before the IPO, so kind of saw the growth stage of a startup pre-IPO. Um, from there, I went to a fintech startup called Hello Wallet in the DC area, as well as a senior PM. We made financial wellness products that were sold as employee benefits, and we got acquired about a year after I joined by one of our investors, Morningstar. So I ran the product team after the acquisition for a year, and then I moved to Chicago a few years ago to join Morningstar and took over a $40 million portfolio of all of the employee benefits we offered, which included the Hello Wallet financial wellness product suite, in addition to a couple of robo-advisors that work within your 401k. So I did that for a couple of years, and I missed the world of startups. And so I started advising on the side, and I really enjoyed it. And so about 3 years ago, I took over this practice from Ben Foster, who's my co-author in the book, and he was the head of product and design at OPower, and basically retired the day of the IPO about 7 years ago and started doing some advisory and coaching work. So I took over the practice about 3.5 years ago. We've worked with about 75 companies, mostly SaaS startups in the last 7 years. I've worked with about 30 myself, and all of those, plus my time in sort of like the product journey here, led us to create, build, or write Build What Matters last year, where we explain kind of our vision-led product management framework. I won't do a deep dive on the framework itself, but I do have a ton of content if anyone wants to learn more about it. So it hopefully won't be surprising to you that when we start talking about product vision and strategy, it's all grounded in sort of like customer insights. And for the most part, that comes from customer discovery interviews. And so we're going to do a deep dive here on sort of the point of them, and why you even consider doing them. And to me, the reason to do these is a concept that I call invest proportionate to confidence. And what it boils down to is sort of like mitigating risk of building the wrong thing for your customers, right? Product development is expensive. Engineers are some of the highest paid people at most companies, especially startups. And as product managers, it's usually our job to make sure that we're prioritizing the most valuable work for them from a customer and business perspective, right? And so I use this graph, which is like if you were going to roll out your product here in these orange lines and sort of like an alpha, beta, general availability, or a feature, slowly roll it out. Hopefully you're building confidence along the way that you're actually rolling the right thing out, right? That it's solving a need for your customers and that the solution is better than anything else that exists out there. And so the confidence kind of goes up with these orange bars, and I made these numbers up just to kind of show this. I'm not saying you actually need to be 25% confident when you launch your alpha, but the point is that over time, you're going to become more confident. What I wanted to talk about was this blue line, and I'm going to sort of pull up the y-axis here, which is cumulative investment of time. And the intent here is to basically say, you wouldn't spend 9 years building a product if you really weren't sure if it was even needed in the market, right? And the whole concept of lean was to sort of like build something, put it out there, and sort of like validate the need, right? And so again, a rule of thumb here, we use sort of like alpha. Maybe you spent a few weeks trying to scope the problem and build something to get something out there and validate that there's a need. Beta, maybe you spent a few months at this point. General availability, you probably spent a few quarters. And like as you get into mature, you found product market fit, you've got like a market leading product, you've probably spent a cumulative number of years building this product. And so the idea is that you've kind of like, you're investing proportionate to confidence. There was a more complex version of this graphic that I kind of simplified, but typically we would ask product teams to have stage gates between alpha and beta and define success metrics to know that it's worth investing another round of sort of like sprints or product development time before you move too far. And so, a natural question that most people ask if they saw this chart is, well, how do you know, where does confidence even come from, right? And my take is that confidence basically comes from evidence. And I think there's different types of evidence that people use to know whether they're building the right thing or solving the right problem. One is quantitative, right? So you might look at a market report, you might look at the product analytics to look at the existing behavioral patterns of your users. You might run a survey and look at survey results, and those are all that's great. There's a lot of numbers that can help build confidence and tell you that what's the right problem to solve or the right solution to build. There's also qualitative, and this comes mostly from talking to people. This might be anecdotes from your sales team, sort of verbatims from your customer support teams, customer discovery interviews, which is what we're going to talk about today. There's also competitive evidence, right? You might see that someone else is doing something in the market that seems to be doing well, and that would be, maybe there's a good reason to try to follow suit. Now, it's a slippery slope here, and I won't get into the competitive landscape side of trying to catch up to someone who's way ahead of you, but there is evidence sometimes that you use that's just like, hey, this is a now a must-have thing, and our product won't be viable in the market if we can't check this box, right? The last one, which I almost debated whether this should be counted as an evidence source, but it's gut instinct. And like, let's be real, right? A lot of execs operate off of this. A lot of product people operate off of this. I often talk to my clients about the art and science of product management and how great product managers know when to go get the data and versus when to just use their instinct, right? And that only comes from experience. So today we're going to do a deep dive here in this qualitative section, and customer discovery interviews kind of falls into this realm. And so obviously, the idea here is, hey, go talk to people. However, it seems like a logical thing, but almost every team that I meet doesn't do nearly enough product customer discovery interviews. And so before we dive into sort of why I think this is or how to do it, I wanted to address what I see as the top barriers to customer discovery and offer like almost a solution to each of these that I've seen. So the first one is, oh, I don't have time. I'm so busy as a product person that I don't have time. I need to work on the sprints and I need to support my engineering team. And to these folks, I say, get off your high horse. You're not that important. Figure out what types of tasks you can delegate and go make it a weekly habit. And I think there's a difference. I worked, a couple at both OPower and Hello Wallet. We use a lot of behavioral science, and you think about the gap between what people say they want to do and what they actually do in the real world. This to me is a classic example, right? Yeah, it's huge, right? But every product person says, yep, I'm customer centric. And then when I ask them how many hours a week they spend talking to customers or doing researching the analytics, yep, you got it, 0, right? It seems kind of crazy. And so my point here is go figure out what you can take off of your plate and make it a weekly habit. To me, it seems totally reasonable. If you want to say you're a customer-centric product person, that 4 or 8 hours, 10 or 20% of your week is spent doing something related to understanding your customers or your users better, right? We're going to talk about customer discovery interviews. It doesn't have to be that. I think it's just as good to go look at the analytics and find out where the click, look at the click funnel and figure out where people are dropping off. Great customer insight, technique. Another one for customer discovery. Oh, I don't know how to recruit these people. And so for that, I'd say, well, in the B2B context, work with your sales team or your customer success team. Maybe you need to set up an advisory board so that customers opt in to being called on once in a while to just provide their thoughts, and you can kind of cycle through them over time. Or there's not very many products I recommend to clients, but there's one that I do every single day and just hands down. It's a service called User Interviews, and basically it eliminates every excuse for recruiting. You could set up a study today, and probably tomorrow you could have 3 to 5 interviews scheduled or the day after. And that's B2C, so consumers, as well as they now have a pretty solid B2B panel. So you can, I've talked to doctors, I've talked to accountants, I've talked to management consultants, they've done a good job recruiting. I don't know if they did expand into new countries. So they were deep on the US, and I think they've expanded to other countries now as well. So I will send this deck out. So for those of you taking notes, please take notes, but you'll also get the deck afterwards, and then you can tell there's a link here. So I'll be sure to send it. Another top reason, scared, and no one's going to say this, right? But my question to these folks is, hey, would you rather wait and spend 6 months of engineering's time and find out that you built the wrong thing or solved the wrong problem? Or would you rather go ask a handful of questions now and learn about it? Again, trying to mitigate risk. Another sort of reason that I see people not wanting to do these is they've never done one before, and it's a little bit intimidating, right? You're gonna have to this random conversation with a stranger, asking them about some kind of personal things. And for that, I'd say practice, practice, practice. We're gonna do a live interview. I'll ask if one of you wants to be the volunteer this time around, but you don't have to do the interview. I'll do the interview, but go practice with your designer. I know I heard a lot of folks are designers right now, and I'm sure you guys have done these before. Go grab your favorite product person and just practice with each other. Great way to get some reps in. It's too late. Oh, we've already started this project. It's already really clear. We're just trying to ship it. We're going to get it out the door. Never too late to start talking to customers. And I think this is something even if you're about to release the official first version, wouldn't hurt to chat with people and show them what it's going to look like and ask them what questions they have, what's confusing, what's missing, all those things. Pointless. I already know what customers want, right? Or I see a lot of, we've got a lot of quantitative data that suggests we've got this. I did the, we've done the market research or the desk research. Well, to them, I always ask is like, is the quantitative data enough? It tells you what people are doing, but it rarely or never can tell you actually why they're doing what they're doing, right? So you might see the market trend report, but it doesn't explain what's driving the behavior across the sort of like segment or the market, right? The other thing I'd ask is like, have you ever sort of like looked at your analytics and then like later realized that there was some fallacy in them and you're like, oh, actually, it said that, but then when we actually talked to people, we heard something drastically different, or we released this feature that the data supported and nobody used it. Well, guess what? Sometimes quantitative data is sort of like not right. And there's a kind of a final reason that I felt was big enough, and I dedicated an entire slide to it. And it was, oh, I don't need to do this. Somebody else already talked to the customer, and therefore we already have a good sense inside of our organization of what this customer or the user wants, right? And for this, we talk about this in the book, and these are some graphics that might look familiar to those of you who have been in the book, but think about how the sort of like an organization matures and like how much interactions there are with customers over time. Early on, it kind of looks like this, right? There's customers, there's users, there's prospects, there's founders, maybe there's early employees. Everyone's talking to these people every single day because there's only a handful of them, right? And your entire company revolves around them. So they get a lot of like FaceTime, you get a lot of interaction. Then what happens? You start building an organization, and then this game of telephone starts happening, right? So you have these like customer user facing teams, and then they funnel information back into the product team. And at every hop along the way, really important context is lost. And by the time it gets into product development, there's a lot of questions of like, wait, what are they trying to do? Did we ask them if they ever try, consider this other option? And then the answer is usually no, just build it, right? And so this is sort of like not ideal, obviously, because you've lost insights and you've lost the sort of ability to get direct feedback and thoughts from the people for whom you're building. And so, we would offer sort of this as an ideal case, and not every organization may be able to implement this, which is that sort of like, customers, users, prospects, they all sit at the center of the entire organization. Everyone has different types of touch points with them, but these blue arrows sort of suggest how the information gets shared internally. And there's a variation of this that you can think of, which is how big is the arrow, right? And if you're sort of a product-driven company, typically what this means is like product and design, probably these arrows are the biggest. And what that means is they spend the most amount of time with these like customers, users, and prospects. And that's necessary because they're going to go set the vision and strategy and figure out what is the right product to build. And one of the hardest things about you sort of implementing that sort of like growth strategy is you put a lot of weight and you're making a big bet on what are the things that matter to customers and what are the things we should say no to. Because if you said yes to everything, you'd be a sales-led organization and your product would get so bloated that no one would know how to use it, right? So at the product-driven organizations, these lines might be the strongest. And I'd say at the sales-driven organizations, it's probably one of these two, maybe marketing, right? And the sort of like strength of this line dictates a lot of the culture of the organization. So I think it's important to think about these things as you think about doing customer discovery and why it's so important to have like one-on-one interactions with your buyers, your users, and prospects, all those things. Let me pause there and just see if anyone has questions before we move into best practices on why it's important to do customer discovery or any of the reasons why teams don't do it. Yeah, Amar, go ahead.
So one of the problems that I'm facing while doing when I want to do customer discovery is that when I'm working with the founders say, "Oh, we know what we're doing. We know what the people want. Just build it. Just build what we want you to build, and don't worry about it." How do I deal with that? What do I tell them? How can I convince them that customer discovery is important?
Yeah. So I think and actually we're going to dive into this with one of the best practices. I think the reality is you may not be able to sort of combat that sort of behavior and culture for some time, right? And typically what happens, especially early stage, because the founders sat in this stage for 1, 2, 3, 4 years, they do probably actually know what customers want. Now, I think the key question to figure out is, were they talking about the problem space with these people, like trying to figure out what problems we're trying to solve, or were they down in the solution space? And typically they're in the solution space because they're just trying to figure out what to build early on, right? And they may miss the questions of like, oh man, we're doing these things for our customers and they're like struggling as buying like competitive products in this other space where it would be a natural reason, we would be a natural fit to go be helping them with these other problems in their lives, right? And so I think that's one question to ask is sort of like what space are they saying no to the discovery work in? Is it on the solution side or the problem side? The other thing I would say, and this is like kind of unfortunate, but sometimes you need the catalyst of a failed product launch or a feature launch to like serve as like that moment of that triggering moment to like introduce like a process change. And in those moments, I think it's helpful to do the retrospective and say, hey, how do we end up here? What happened? What can we be doing better going forward? And that's like a natural time to introduce customer discovery and just say like, look, we need to reduce the risk of this ever happening again. And I think to me, one of the best solutions is for us to spend, and I think you could have something very reasonable. 5 or 8 hours every month is like a good starting point, right? It's better than nothing. Or at every sort of inception or major initiative kickoff, like it seems like a logical and reasonable thing to say, yeah, we're going to take a day or two to like go talk to people to make sure we're building the right stuff before we go invest like, 3 or 4 months in building something, Great question. Okay, I'll pause again after best practices. So we're going to talk about sort of like the meat of today's sessions, best practices and customer discovery interviews. This is the process we typically recommend using with our clients, and it's kind of based on sort of years of experience here. So hopefully nothing too crazy here. The first step is to prepare. This is really about thinking about what are you trying to learn and who do you need to talk to. Go recruit those people, interview them, summarize your insights. And then this is the most important one, especially as a product manager. Go make a recommendation. What should we do as a result of all this? And I see a lot of decks and things that are really amazing and be like, wow, these are really cool insights. And then it's like, so what? And so let's do a deep dive on each one of these things. I've got a few best practices here in the preparation step. So first and foremost, get aligned. Make sure everyone knows who are we trying to talk to and what are we trying to learn? What is the goal of this study? It does take time. We're going to go take, 1 or 2 days to go do this work. Let's make sure that everyone knows why we're doing it and what we're going to learn from it. And like I said, there's a couple different types of these types of studies, and these are just 2 examples of like the highest level. One is the sort of generative research. And I think of this in very much more of the product strategy realm, which is like, I need to identify what are the key outcomes or like, problems we want to solve for these folks. And I normally combine these 2 things together. I need to understand how they're currently solving this and what's working and what's not. So it's a little bit of a dive into the competitive landscape, and all of those insights should be extracted to help inform long-term product vision and strategy, right? Or maybe near-term roadmaps. Then there's more evaluative, and if you like Dan Olson, this is the solution space. This is getting feedback on something concrete. So I've got a wireframe I want to show you. I've got a user flow I want your feedback on. I got this feature that just launched. I want you to log into the product and tell me what you think about it. Those types of things. But this is where you're evaluating something concrete and trying to get feedback, probably more on the solution side of things. The next is to sort of get hypotheses. And this is maybe another technique that could be helpful before doing the first interview, especially if you're trying to build the momentum and a habit of customer discovery. This could be an effective technique. Ask all the stakeholders who are going to get the readout and the summary of what you learned to document what they think you're going to hear. And what we ask teams to do is actually write this down so that later you can come back and say, where can we put like literally a green check mark and say, all right, we validated our assumption or understanding here. Or we can sort of like say, you know what, we were totally wrong here. I'm gonna put a red X next to this. And so this is a way to sort of communicate the value of customer discovery, which is that we're validating to build confidence, or we're learning to make sure we're not building the wrong things or solving the wrong problems, right? And kind of diving into prep. So I'm going to just give an example here for a B2b script. And actually this will be, I'm going to do a mix of these 2 things in the a live session in a little bit. This is just a rough pass. I'd say in B2B interviews, 30 to 45 minutes is all I can ever really get out of folks. And so I'm looking at that as a timeline. I usually start off with like intros and warm up, just kind of explain the context. I always start with company goals because I'm trying to figure out where my product even falls on their list of things that they care about in their world. And I found that the company goals and OKRs are often really good reflections of like what's top of mind, what are their metrics of success, what are they trying to accomplish, what's going on at the organization. So I usually start with that. And then, like I mentioned, I often say, okay, so you're trying to grow top line revenue. How are you guys doing it? How's it going? What tools are you using? What products are you using? And they might mention, sales tools or onboarding tools or customer success tools or whatever. And then it's just kind of simple retrospective like question: what's working? What's not? What do you like about that product? What's bad about it? So usually doing a deep dive in there. And then sometimes in the sort of like, as a part of the wrap up, I will occasionally throw in a wish list question, which is just like, hey, you're an existing customer. What do you wish we were helping you with right now that we're not? And this is another good way of getting at like, what are the problems that they're facing where they would naturally think of you as a solution in the solution space. So again, we're kind of in that problem space. So here's an example of a sort of like more of a consumer facing script and an evaluative. This will be a usability test. So same thing, just doing some intros and warm-ups. Oftentimes I'll ask about the existing solution, especially if I know what the competitors are, or if this is not like, hey, I want you to switch from if this is not like a product launch situation where I'm trying to convince them to switch from their product to mine, then I'll ask about the existing product, right? Hey, log into the dashboard. Let me see, like, how often do you log in? Show me what you normally do. Like, tell me what you're thinking as you go through it. And then if we have something more specific to get feedback on, so if I've launched a new feature, then one, I'll see if they naturally find the new feature on their own. And if not, I like write down like a awareness or discoverability issue, and I take that back to the team. If they do, great. I just ask them to kind of share their screen and click around and just think out loud and get some great insights there. And so for anyone who's done these types of interviews, hopefully you can attest to the fact that even 20 minutes of something like this is like, you get an insanely rich amount of information that no survey, that no funnel analytics or product analytics is ever going to get you. So these are some of the tips on the sort of preparation side. I'll pause here. Any questions on the prep step? Yes.
So is there a place in your practice for more like almost a fishing expedition type surveys? Just trying to figure out problems that the existing customers need to solve that we can solve, like, but just more not so much asking what they're doing now or what is painful for you, like pain point prospect. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sorry, I had a little bit of a hard time hearing you, but I think the question was like, is it possible to send a survey to understand how the existing product is performing? Was that the question?
Sorry. Yeah, let me turn.
Wow, that is a haunted hotel. He just disappeared and came back.
So more like a fishing expedition to then like, what is our competition doing, or and more just like what pain are you experiencing, and maybe identify a market, or
yeah, I think so. Okay, yeah, so just more around identifying pain points, I think, in kind of in a more generative sense of like, what are all the things that are pain points? So yes, I think the thing that I see a lot of teams do though is like, they ask kind of an open-ended question in that vein of like, well, tell me about your pain points, but it's like, it's way too broad and it's not very actionable because, one, I think there's a fallacy of pointing into like your market space and saying, well, what are the pain points in the realm that we operate in? And then there's a problem that comes back with that data, which is, no one will ever have a shortage of pain points that they'll be able to explain about what's wrong with the world. The question is whether it's so painful that they're willing to do something about it. And so it always comes back to how they prioritize those pain points in their life. Are they willing to like live with it because they just don't care that much, or something that doesn't happen very frequently and it's painful, but like, who cares? Like, I don't go to the emergency room very often, but I know it's not fun. But it's not like, I wouldn't be like, yeah, I wish there were better emergency rooms. And like some company then is like, oh, we're going to build it. And it's like, you know, it's not, there's not necessarily a business model there just because I think that the emergency room experience isn't great, right? So I think there's an important context to get to, which is sort of like what's top of mind. And that's usually where the company goal OKR question is sort of like designed to get at, which is like, what are the metrics you use every single week or month to like measure your company's issues? And on the personal side, if you're kind of talking to consumers, it's a way harder question to figure out how to ask, you know, and there's probably some tips I can offer there, but I think the question around pain points is good, but you just have to be very, very cautious about how you ask it and what you do with it afterwards, because it may not mean that they're willing to change their behavior as a result of a pain point existing. Great question. Cool. Let me dive into some of the recruiting best practices. So, you know, one of the questions I get often is sort of how many people should we be recruiting? There is kind of a rule of thumb, 5 to 8 in these types of qualitative interviews. If you target your audience properly and they're pretty similar to each other, you'll start noticing a pattern, and you should be able to extract. There's sort of this point of diminishing return where like the 10th or 15th interview you do, you're going to be like, I'm pretty sure I know what this person's going to say because we've heard it for each of the last 2 or 3 interviews. So this is usually a kind of a rule of thumb here. Sometimes you might need to include an incentive. There's a link here to a user interviews guide. What I see typically is like the B2B space, I think it's like $100 an hour, or $120 or something. And then in the B2C space, something more like 60. And I find that to be kind of the right rule of thumb. I learned this from our user researcher at Hello Wallet. We used to schedule a lot of interviews on Mondays and people would just forget about them. So we stopped doing it. You know, this is like, take it with a grain of salt. I think depends on who you're going after, but sometimes, especially with consumers, not best. And then I do think when you're recruiting, it's probably important to tell them about any of the technical things. I think a lot of these discovery interviews are probably happening over Zoom right now. As a concrete example, I basically stopped doing usability testing on mobile phones, like trying to figure out how to share your screen from Zoom on an iPhone. It was like painful, especially when I was at Savonics. We were selling to like people who were like 70 or 75 years old. And it was just, we would spend 10 minutes out of a 40-minute usability test trying to get them to figure out how to share their screen. So I do think it's helpful to kind of explain those things to them and be like, hey, you need to download this app, test it out this way. And then you might see this in some of those products. So. Okay, I'm going to cover a couple steps and I'll pause again for questions. This is really around interviewing and best practices here. The first one is, if possible, see if someone can join you. It's always helpful to have someone taking notes, and we'll talk a little bit in a minute about another thing that's really helpful to do right afterwards, which is debrief. And sometimes when you're trying to have a conversation, it's really hard to then also be taking notes and like you're kind of all over the place. So if you can, it's always great. Product plus design is a really common pattern here, right? So the product, either sometimes the designer is actually leading the interview, the product person is listening in, or vice versa. Warm up with small talk. So like, keep in mind, this is probably a stranger and you're about to ask them to be honest with you. And so you have to build some rapport, and you might be asking some personal questions. You might be asking them to do, you're definitely going to be asking them to do something that's kind of unnatural if you're doing the usability test, which is to think out loud while they're looking at something on a screen, right? And so, you know, I think it's always helpful to just, I usually start with just, hey, how's the week going? Where are you? You know, what's going on with the weather there? Oh, you know, so. Another tip, you know, we talked about the prepare step of having like kind of a rough sense of what the interview guide is. Make sure it doesn't feel like the Spanish Inquisition or like sort of like a visit to the DMV where they're like asking, just looking down a list of things and like checking answers off. You know, it's intended to be a guide. You want it to feel super conversational so that it flows naturally, but you do need to keep your eye on time and make sure that you get through all the questions you want answered along the way. Related to questions, watch out for leading questions. Obviously, the most egregious of this would be like, so you would want this feature, right? And like, guess what? This is a really awkward situation. They know you're working on this product. Of course, they're going to say, yes, that's a cool idea. Yeah, I like it. It's really good. But I think the less egregious versions of these is even like, putting words in their mouth. And I've been guilty of this myself. And I'm doing discovery interviews right now for Prodify with some of our clients. And like, I've almost played back something to someone and I realized that I probably misinterpreted. And so I just asked them to clarify, but like being like, oh, so then what you mean is this, or so you would do this next, right? And I think that's like another variation of this type of situation that could lead you down to some false positives. This was a lesson I learned kind of during business school. I interned at General Mills in the consumer insights team, and I worked on old El Paso refried beans and Betty Crocker boxed potatoes. And I sat behind one-way mirrors and listened to focus groups. And I had to go to a grocery store in Pittsburgh and stand in the aisle and talk to people. Basically, their best practice was they kept 2 Post-it notes and they would jot down things that they found interesting, surprising, or they were like, I think they called them we shoulds. And so they had 2 different colors. And so they would just jot those down so that when you came out of it, you just had a list of things that were interesting and insightful. And this is super helpful when you're trying to summarize the insights from a session. If you are doing a usability test, I found it helpful to just ask them to share their screen. The reason being that they're like comfortable with their own browser and their bookmarks, and actually the bookmarks and browser is like some of the most insightful information I've ever gotten, because you remind yourself of the reality in which, you know, web apps or mobile apps are being used in the world, and you can kind of get a sense for like what's going on in their world. Another one kind of related to leading questions. I don't know, actually, I was talking to some of the Prodify advisors here, and I think maybe I'm a little bit too sensitive on this one. I just learned from all the user researchers that I worked with early on in my career that why is sort of a bad phrase here, because it puts people on the defensive and it sort of suggests that they had a wrong answer. But the reality is, when you're doing these types of interviews, there's no wrong answer. You're just asking for their opinion. And so when you ask someone why they did something, it sort of suggests that they are like headed down the wrong path, or that they did something that was unexpected or like wrong from your perspective. So I learned that tell me more is often a much better way of doing that, which is like, oh, can you tell me more about, what you would expect if you clicked on that button, or tell me more about how you're using this product, those types of things, or how you chose it, or those types of things. And then, like I said, if you do have someone else, or even if you're by yourself, usually I take 10 or 15 minutes between interviews, and I never schedule them back to back, so that I have time to debrief or with someone else and just say like, okay, what'd you hear? What was shocking? What was interesting? What are some of the ideas swirling around in your head? Let's write them down. And for those of you who have done back-to-back interviews, they all start blending together after a while. So it's actually really helpful to split them up and make sure you're remembering these things. I do this, Mark mentioned I'm going to do a talk next week in the Job Club. I do it after phone screens as well. During the interview process, I just jot down kind of my initial impressions and stuff right after a phone screen to make sure it's fresh and I won't forget those things. And it does take me time. If in a 30-minute interview, it probably will take me 10 or 15 minutes to go debrief and look back through my notes and sort of extract some of those key insights. It just helps a lot when you're trying to then later summarize some of the key facts. Any questions on sort of best practices around recruiting or interviewing? I kind of went through 2 steps here.
You didn't talk anything about whether you're recording the interviews in any way, whether it's video recorded or just audio and so on. And so I wondered if you'd speak to that a little.
Yeah, sorry, great question. Yes, I do try to record as often as I can. And normally I sort of have a double opt-in at the beginning in the warm-up. Ask them if it's okay to record before I start. And then after I start recording, I just say, hey, I just want to confirm and get you on record here that you're okay if this is recorded. And then I usually tell them what's going to happen. And usually the answer is like, hey, I'd want to record so I can, listen better, and then also just know that this will never be shared beyond anyone in my company, and that's usually like enough for most people to say yes to it. Great question. Oh, sorry, I just realized the chat's been going off. All right, hold on, there's some good questions. Avoid do you questions. What innovation or technologies to further automate customer interviews? Okay, yeah. Eileen, great question here on tools. So the one that I've seen that's pretty cool, well, there's 2 that I've seen really recently, and I'll find the names. One is the transcription services. So like basically if you do have a recording, there's a few services, you can just upload the file and it'll like basically have transcriptions. Some of the cool features I've seen there is they highlight the words being said while the recording is playing, so you can kind of watch it. And then I think there's another one, and I'm trying to remember. I just saw one of my clients demo this. I think it was called Dovetail. I'll see if I can find the link. One of the holy grails or biggest missing gaps in my mind from a tool set perspective with customer discovery interviews is like what I would call the knowledge repository. Let's say you did all these in like period, you know, every week someone was doing customer discovery interviews. How do you share that information across the organization? This product called Dovetail was pretty cool because you could drop all the interviews that were happening in here, and you could tag them and tag specific clips or moments with like insights, and have, there's like just like a simple tagging system of like, oh, this was an insight. And like, you know, for example, when I was at Hello Wallet, our user research design team, they just had an internal blog, and every interview was a blog post, but they would tag it with what features they like talked about during that. So whenever I was like interested in seeing like the budgeting feature set in our fintech product, I just click on budgeting and I can see all the interviews. So I think that's another kind of interesting one. Martina, do you have any thoughts on interviews related to software versus hardware products? So I've only worked with maybe 1 or 2 companies that had both hardware and software, so I probably can't speak to this. Obviously with hardware, I think in person is a much better format or technique. Curious if anyone else has done a lot of research on hardware products though. Oh, sorry, Martina clarified. More hardware that may have not have been developed yet. Okay, cool. So, you know, I think I've only seen the type of case studies from design thinking or design sprints where they built like a prototype in one day, and it was like, you know, a bunch of boxes that were kind of painted to represent what the hardware might look like, and put that in front of users and ask them to kind of touch and feel and talk about what features they would expect and things like that. So I think prototyping might be an interesting way of getting at some of the hardware usability or sort of like problem-space feedback.
So on that one, I actually was working on a product a little while ago that was a physical product, but it had a huge touch screen that you'd interact with it, and then had also a desktop experience. And the desktop experience was actually a little bit, so I called it the try it before you buy it. That way people could check it out, you know, before spending bazillions of dollars to buy this piece of equipment. And there, it was one of those cases that you said earlier on, I forgot, damn, where I wrote it down. But the client's like, well, we'll just sell it, and when we get their complaints, then we'll know what we need to change. And I'm like, no. So a year later, I have a proposal into them for doing that same testing.
Yeah, for sure. I will say AR and VR is probably one of the innovations in this space, right? So when I do furniture shopping, you could like take a picture in your living room and see what the sofa is going to look like. My parents just sold their house, and they used Matterport, which is pretty cool. It created like this 3D dollhouse view of their house, and you could quickly zoom around the entire house and get a sense of the layout of the house before you zoomed in and looked at the 3D tour of pictures. And so like, I was actually thinking that Airbnb or like Vrbo needs to like have that, because sometimes you look at those pictures, it's really hard to get a sense of like the actual layout. So interesting thoughts there. And yes, thank you, Eileen, for sending the Dovetail. Justin, yep, I think Slack channels, and I've seen that a lot as well. The challenge I've seen with the Slack channels is like, if you miss the real-time message, it's kind of hard to figure out like, well, what are all the things we know about users in this like category or this you know, domain afterwards. Okay, thank you guys for the questions. All right, I'm going to share a couple more best practices, and then we'll do a live case study, and if anyone wants to volunteer. All right, so we talked about sort of after you've done the interviews, trying to summarize all of it. You know, like I said, what was interesting, what was validating, what are some of the ideas? These are some of the things that if you're keeping notes along the way, it's super helpful to have just here. I also think that grouping your insights into themes. So like you might say, okay, these are the things I learned about their motivations and goals, and here's what I learned about the competitive space, and here's what I learned about the actual usability. You know, I'm not saying you need all of these themes for every single one, but at the end of the day, you're trying to summarize the key insights and takeaways, and think about it this way. You know, the execs who weren't in any of those interviews, what are the top 2 or 3 things you want them to know that you learned from those? And some of them might be validating, some of them might not. And either way, it's just like you're trying to like really synthesize and like whittle this down. And I think, Amr, you just said that you did this as well. So pulling verbatims, or actually, I think the audio clips. And I don't remember, I think Dovetail maybe does this a little bit better now. I know I've seen some products like Full Story and stuff where you could like send a link to a specific time spot on some of these recordings. But for those of you who read the book, Ben talked about when he was at, he did it at Go Canvas. Anyways, he went on a roadshow inside of his organization communicating the product vision and strategy. And the way he ended up doing it was he just pieced together a bunch of clips of customer discovery interviews. He didn't say a single word about what problems the customers were asking about or what usability feedback they were coming with. He just played these clips, side by side, asked the team, what were the key takeaways that you had from there, wrote it on a whiteboard, and then sent a document out afterwards. That was all the same things that he knew that people were going to take away from those sort of like verbatims. And I think it's a really great way to bring the voice of the customer and like literally the voice of the customer into the sort of like picture. And then, like we said, if you did go through the exercise of doing the hypotheses beforehand, go back and put a green check mark or put a red X, put a question mark next to some of those things and see what, that you can use these. And if you put a question mark next to it, that's okay. It kind of helps inform the backlog of sort of what the next round of discovery interviews are going to cover. Oh, yes. Oh, nice. So I see a couple more ties, some great ones. All right. Cool. Thank you, guys. All right. Last step, recommendations. For this is hard, right? This is the core of why you do the interviews. What you can take away from it. I thought I'd just sort of break down some of the types of recommendations. So there might be these big pictures, which is like, hey, we got the problem space wrong. In our framework, we call these key outcomes, like what are they trying to accomplish? And maybe we've been solving this problem for them, and it's pretty clear that they're like, nobody's solving this other thing. And so maybe we need to think about this from a big picture perspective. We also, in our vision-led framework, we talk about the holistic journey for like how they discover you and how they evaluate your product and how they try it and use it. Sometimes some of the insights that come out of these sessions are like, wow, nobody knows we exist and we need to do much better on the discovery side of things. And that's a key takeaway, and perhaps not even for the product team, right? It could be for the marketing team or the sales team on sort of building awareness of the product in the market. Another major type of insight is just, hey, everyone who's using this competitor really is complaining about this thing that they're not doing well, right? And that's an opportunity for us to go differentiate against them. And that's another type of kind of big picture recommendation that could come out of these types of interviews. A little bit more tactical, usability testing. So, we're seeing this drop off at this stage in the conversion funnel. And like now we saw the drop off and now we asked why the drop off was happening. It's pretty clear. They didn't see the button. They didn't know what it was going to do. We need to change the words on it. Just kind of some minor tweaks there to optimize funnels or usability issues. Or it might be kind of nearer term. It's just like, hey, next quarter, we thought we were going to be working on this thing. Maybe we need to just kind of shift the priority around, postpone it by a quarter, those types of things. And the last set of best practices here is when you're presenting these recommendations, and I would say it's probably best to sort of share these in a kind of live session to the extent you can. Share those verbatims like we talked about, help bring the customer voice to life. And I've been sort of guilty of this. Sometimes what I found helpful is like put the insight in a table on one column and then put the sort of recommendation right next to it to make sure that there's a very, very tight connection between what you heard in the interviews and what you think we should do. I've been biased myself where I was just like, I kind of think we should go do this, but I'm going to do this research to validate that need. And so like I kind of introduced a lot of bias and I just like came up with recommendations that were like somewhat disjointed from the insights that came out of the interviews. And so I think this is a good pressure test at the end to make sure that you're not introducing your own biases into the sort of like results or the recommendations. And then ask your stakeholders for feedback. Was anything surprising? Was anything interesting? Did anyone disagree with anything? You want to make sure that you've got buy-in, and sometimes there might be some questions on the validity of the data and who you talk to and whether they were representative of the target audience and stuff. And all those are good. They help bring better alignment as you start talking with, sales, marketing, execs, engineering, whoever the case may be, to make sure everyone's on the same page about who we're building for and what problems are we trying to solve. So let me pause there and just see if anyone has any more questions on the actual steps here, best practices. All right, cool. Who wants to do a live interview? Any volunteers? we'll just do it for like five or 6 minutes.
I can try it.
Okay.
Let me start video.
I might
Sorry.
have 2 hands. Okay. Who was that? Sorry. Sometimes.
Oh, I said the thing, and so.
Okay. Cool.
Both Lauren and Bryn volunteered.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. Cool. So Gwen, I'm just gonna do something here, and we are gonna do a live discoverability test on the Partify website. We just updated our homepage, and so to keep it simple, I thought I would just do this. And so, all right, so I'm gonna kick this off, and then let me just get one thing ready here, Gwen, which is make sure that I have a link. Okay, awesome. All right. Hey, Gwen, thank you so much for joining today. I'm Rajesh, and really appreciate your time. Your job today is really easy. I just wanted to get some feedback on some changes that we made to a website for our business. There's no right or wrong answers. All I'm looking for is your opinion. And so I will ask you to do something that's a little bit awkward, which is to kind of think out loud. I'll remind you once in a while to do it, but thanks again for the time. How's the week been going for you?
Pretty crazy. But
Was
you
it?
know, it's not over yet.
Yeah, we're only on Wednesday, right? All right. Well, hopefully this won't be any add to any of the craziness for you as we get started. Gwen, before we kind of dive straight into the actual website, I was hoping to ask you some questions. And so, I was curious on how much you've been thinking about product management and sort of your experience so far with the role. I know you mentioned during the screener that you're kind of breaking into the role. So curious if you could tell me a little bit about how that journey's gone so far.
It's an interesting journey because it was only 2 years ago that I considered switching into tech of some sort as it was, and I felt like the UX role is quite a bit like putting together a set of documents for architectural drawings, and I was quite used to working with engineering disciplines of various sorts. And not to be flippant, but I had the luckiest situation in the world that I was invited to come in and shadow a group that was going to start doing UX on a project. And they spent like an hour or two just telling me about the project in general. And the next day it was a call with the client, and I must have asked good questions, because then I got a text saying, okay, so we'll pay you this much an hour. And I just started working. So that was a good way to get a first UX job. But then, as I mentioned earlier on when Mark was having the pre-work, I have a friend that I worked with as an architect, and she's like, no, you should be doing product. You shouldn't be doing UX. I think that you can just walk in and start doing product. And so the company she works for is hiring in their Austin office. And so she's just like been really insistent that I do interviews. So there I am.
Got it. Okay, cool. And tell me more about where you turn to learn more about the role of product.
Well, as I said earlier, I go to a whole bunch of product league meetings, or watch them online now, since they're not in person anymore. And I do a lot of product gym, and just a whole bunch of various online things, and try to read a lot and talk to different people.
Okay. Do you have a favorite sort of like set of resources or type of resource that you like? The meetups, the reading, the content?
I like doing a lot more of the meetup kind of stuff, just to have the more interactive way of getting about stuff. When you're reading a book, unless you know the author, then it's hard to ask questions about the book. So
yeah, got it. Okay. Is there anything that you wish the meetups were better at?
Ooh. That's a hard one, because each one is so different. It's nice sometimes when there's the stream of questions and so on that can happen while you're in a meetup, but rather than having to hold things to the end, but sometimes that really interrupts the continuity of it, and you feel like everybody just sort of gets lost.
Got it. Okay, cool. Well, hey, Gwen, I was hoping to have you share your screen. I just realized something, Mark. Hopefully it's okay for me to Maybe I can't make you a co-host. Do you see a share screen button by chance? On
It says the host disabled participant screen
Okay.
sharing, so somebody has to give me permission first.
Okay, no worries. All right, I'm going to violate one of my own rules that I just talked to y'all about then. Like, I'll do the screen share. Sorry, I forgot about the tech side of this. And then, Gwen, I'm going to try something. I don't know if you've done this, but it is a feature called remote control. And I am going to give you control over my computer and ask you to just think out loud as you look at the Prodify website.
Okay. So I'm looking at it full screen on a pretty sizable monitor, so I can, really get a good sense of what's going on. And I don't know if I was on, maybe I should switch it to my laptop screen, because I'm just a little curious as to some of the stuff, how small it would be on a smaller format, I guess I should say.
Okay.
And so I just want to, I can't scroll on here, can I, right? So, okay, I can scroll with my mouse, but the touch screen doesn't work. Okay.
Okay, got it.
So it's nice.
Tell me what you're thinking as you're scrolling down.
As I'm scrolling down, it's nice that it's sort of like the who we help. It just says in broad categories, and then it tells a little bit more about them, and then tells about the service for each one of those. Then obviously you can click on buttons that say learn more to check things out. And below that, you have a sampling of some of the customers, and you can click on another button to see a complete list in case you're looking for somebody in particular. And as I continue scrolling down, it talks about who we are, and it gives sort of like a one-sentence blurb about it, but then it has the headshots with everybody's name below them, and they're grouped into whether they're product advisors and coaches or co-founders and so on, and then talks about products that have been built by you all. And you can click a button to see our experience, and then there's a picture of the cover of your book and learn more and a blurb about the book. It's also got a little pop-up that's coding up on the lower left-hand corner of my screen about applying our vision-led product management framework to your product. And so that lets you access a free guide or close out of that. And then there's a little section that talks about how we work and gives just, some general overviews, like a FAQ kind of thing, because it has, what you'll get, retainer, actionable advice, community, and the process being a call, a free trial, and check-ins. And then a bunch of quotes from your clients, and it has, their name, their title, their headshot, and some verbatim from the clients. So everybody's looking very happy there. And then a last call to action with a hero there and your footer.
Okay. So, thank you. I appreciate that. Tell me about your initial impressions.
Overall, there's, a bunch of things I'd probably click on and check out a little bit more. One thing I always wish was everywhere on sites is like the back to the top thing, so I don't have to scroll back up to the top. But that's just me. It's nice. Again, there's across the top is sort of, those same groups are listed, and they each have drop downs of different things, so that way you can see a little bit about them. Sorry, I was just looking. The who we serve is there, the clients, the about. But in the about, I would expect that to be able to have those headshots and the little blurbs, sort of where there was the two groups about the product advisors and coaches and the co-founders and so on. I would sort of expected that to be in the about section.
Got it.
And the resources is good, book, library, blog, framework. So that's nice to see all those things there, and I would want to go and check that out. So.
Okay. Gwen, I'm going to ask you maybe a little bit of an awkward question. If I wasn't here and we weren't talking, what would you do next?
I'd probably start looking in the resources first.
Okay, let's do that.
All right. So we talked about the book before, so I'm going to go to the library. And so the library looks like, maybe it has a combination of blog entries, but also it sort of talks a little bit more to your process, where it goes to strategic planning. And so you can learn about, there's a button, learn about product vision and strategy library, and then customer journey, and you can learn about that library, execution, and learn about that library. So then of course there's another call to action at the bottom about, request a call with us and so on. So you could check it out.
Okay, awesome. All right, I'm going to pause there and then, well, maybe let me see here. All right. Okay. Gwen, thank you so much for volunteering. I'll pause here and just see what questions came up for y'all. If there was anything interesting or surprising about sort of how that interview unfolded. The one thing I'll call out here is I learned this the hard way. Silence is kind of golden. In fact, some of the coolest tools I've seen from a recording perspective drew a pie chart of how much like I spoke during an interview versus how much the other person spoke. And so it's kind of helpful because I realized pretty fast, I was like, dang, I talk way too much during these things. And so like, Gwen was doing a really great job of just like going all the way down the homepage. And so, I did my best to just make sure I wasn't interrupting. And I just said, all right, let me see like kind of what she's thinking as she hears and see these things. So that was kind of one takeaway for me. It was like, it was almost like unnatural for me to just sit there and listen for that long, but I just kind of forced myself to. So curious if there's anything else that was interesting or kind of key takeaways from y'all.
So you mean everybody else, not me, right? That's why I'm like being quiet, and I'm like, they're all talking at once.
I think, Martina, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I think it was very interesting that you asked her where she would go next. And I think this is the part that may be different for many people, because I'm sure I'm not the only one who like thought in my head what I would do, and it was something different than what Gwen would do. So I'm thinking if this is something that maybe like the useful part to get feedback on from users.
Yeah, this was like another thing where I just learned like, we used to look at our dashboard of analytics of product usage behavior all the time, and we'd be like, oh, everyone goes to the homepage and they immediately click on this. And so like when I do these types of usability interviews, I'm like always curious to know why people are clicking on what they're doing. And so by doing this, I would just say, hey, could you log into the product and then just think out loud while you're like clicking through. And I would immediately see them do that thing that we saw in the analytics. And I'd be like, oh, so like, tell me what happened there. Like, you were on the homepage and then you clicked on this. And then they were like, yeah, because I came here to do this one task and it's not on the homepage. So like, I always click on this button. And so like, it was like super helpful. And so this is one of those situations where, especially with usability tests, I really like to make sure that they get a chance to kind of explore, but think out loud, because that's like a rich set of insights that I would never get from anything else. And then often I'm like really trying to ask them to go to a particular page. And so then I wait to see how long whether they would naturally do it. And if they don't, that's okay. That's an insight for me to write down and be like, they didn't even see this page or didn't care about it. And then I just be like, you know what? I really wanted to ask you about this client's page. Could you click on the link here and like, tell me what you're thinking when you go there? And so that's like, I'll often structure the script to create a lot of like open space on usability time where they're like, they could just do whatever they want, but they can think out loud.
So there may also be a difference between somebody going on the page and just scrolling on the first one, that's like a little bit artificial, and someone going to your page, because if I'm just going to your page like without being guided, I probably have a reason why I'm going there. So maybe that reason is that I want to know what your product is. So I would be like looking for more information about the product or price or something like that. But with this interview, it was different because we are scrolling through, and like the thoughts that I had were, this is interesting that you have advisors above founders. Like I would probably put it the other way around. And when you ask like, where would people go next? I would totally want to check on who the founders are, So I would be curious if I can right click and maybe see more information about the founders or go to their LinkedIn.
Yeah, ding, ding, ding. This is like the exact usability feedback and analytics that we're seeing on the website too.
Yeah, but I'm like, sorry, go ahead, Gwen.
Oh, well, I was going to say, but because we already knew that Rajesh is one of the founders, and we knew who the other founder was because they've co-written the book together. So I already knew the answer to that question. And as I had scrolled down in their original page, then the sort of FAQ stuff that I would naturally want to go check out first was right there already. So that popped up as opposed to having to go to a FAQs, button or tab or whatever type of thing. And so then that's why for me, then it was naturally to see like, okay, so what stuff do they have here? What are they showing? So.
Yeah, and Martina, you bring up a good point though that I think is actually really important if you're going to go do usability testing. So like, it's one thing to be like, I really want them to just go to this page and tell me what they think. This is the moment to go ask about their natural behaviors though. What is the trigger that normally prompts them to log into your product? Ask that question and then be like, oh, you get an email. Can you show me the most recent one that you got from your inbox? And like, let's talk about what you thought when you saw it. And then like, I've actually done this with our marketing teams before where the Facebook ads like weren't converting at the rate that they expected. And so we did a usability test where we literally pulled up a screenshot of the Facebook ad and like just said, hey, tell us what you're thinking as you look at this Facebook ad. What are you expecting to see on the page when you click through? And like, we got some really good insights on like where the confusion was between expectations and the reality. And like, Gwen pointed out a really good one for me, which was like, oh, when I hovered over about, I would have expected like the team or founders to be one of the drop downs there. And it's just like, sometimes the expectations are the insights that you'll never get from a survey or a quantitative interview. And this is the type of stuff that you can extract through the discovery interviews.
Yeah, those are all good suggestions. I'm also curious if you have any thoughts on how to simulate what the users would normally do, because I'm sure that when you look at them, they behave differently because you instructed them to do something, right?
Yeah, so I think this is like, it's kind of like, I think of quantitative and qualitative as like the yin and the yang, and you go back and forth as like a ping pong match, right? So this is probably one of those situations where I'd probably ask the analytics team or try to pull the analytics and be like, okay, I know that this many people are logging in. Let me go figure out like how they're getting to the login page. And is it an email? Is it they're coming from the .com site or whatever? And then I can kind of like piece that together. There's obviously some more natural instances of this as well, which is like there are remote usability testing sites like usertesting.com where you might send them the email and then ask them to go into the page or go to a page and like do that. It's probably, those are better for like public products or like URLs in my mind, but you might be able to do it for products as like kind of authenticated pages and stuff too.
Yeah, I'm also curious how strategic you are when you are choosing whom to interview. Are you looking like at your current users or target users that you don't have yet, or a combination, or is there any other kind of strategy?
Yeah, it's a really great question. This comes back to the prepare step. What is the goal of the study? And I often connect it back into the business objective, right? So if our goal is growth and that growth is expected to come from new logos, I don't want to talk to my existing customers because their insights, they're jaded, right? They have an opinion of our product. They've used it for a while. They already know what it does. I want to go talk to the people who have no idea who we are, and I want to recruit. And like, I would probably like in that example, I probably would take them through our marketing site before I like ask them to go do a demo of the product or something like that. Flip kind of conversely, if you're trying to solve like a retention or a churn problem, then you do need your existing customers or users. And I'd say the one lesson learned here is I've basically found it impossible to recruit inactive users to come do usability testing. Like they're inactive for a reason. Like they've disengaged from the product or the company or the brand for like some time. We spent a lot of time and money trying to recruit these people, and like we did like 2 interviews and they were helpful, but we basically stopped trying to recruit these folks. And this is why we focus on the onboarding experience. When I was at Hello Wallet, we were like, we have a leaky funnel, these people come in on day 1 and we lose them immediately. And so we spent a lot of time on the onboarding experience and tried to just talk to them while they're going through it. We ran a handful of experiments and ended up boosting retention by like 50% just by like talking to them and figuring out what was going on in the onboarding experience.
Thank you.
Any other questions or thoughts? I know we're coming up on time. Awesome, Vishal. Thanks for coming.
Actually, I have one more question. Is there a recording for this talk? Because I only caught it like when it was already in progress.
Number one question everybody asks in every meeting. Yes, it will be recorded. It'll be put on a mosquito just flew in my ear. It'll be put on Product Hired's YouTube channel under our product tank section. But I'll send a link to everyone since that's not super intuitive. But you can go to YouTube and type Product Hired, and it'll be there in the next day or so. And there's tons of other videos that we have there as well, so you can check those out.
That's super useful. I'm visiting from Pittsburgh, so this is very useful information. Thank you.
Are you in Austin?
No, I'm in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
You're in Pittsburgh. You're in Pittsburgh visiting us. I get it.
Yes, I'm in Pittsburgh visiting you virtually. It's the World Products Day, so I just went to the World Products page and I looked at the schedule and I was like, you are like last on the timeline. So
are we last?
I can catch this. I think you are the last one. Yeah.
San Francisco isn't showing the love, I guess. So.
Oh, really?
Eileen, last question here, DC, in incentives. So I think yes, and sometimes you have to. I would probably start and figure out if you can recruit without the incentives. Obviously, it ends up being cheaper. But I often get this question of whether you're going to get biased information with it because you paid someone. And I've basically found that that's not true. Now, there are some people who know how to game these types of like recruiting systems and they know what answers. And so the one tip I would offer is when you do your screening, make sure that the answer to the question is not obvious, right? So if the question is like, have you rented a car in the last 6 months through Avis? Then like, they're just gonna be like, yep, definitely have. Instead, you could be like, which of these services have you used in the last 6 months? And it could be like Avis, like Netflix. And then now they're just like, I have no idea what they're screening for. So that's the one tip I would offer, because there are some like professional like interviewers and they just know how to like game these systems. And so, but like user interviews, for example, they have a good feature set on the screening side. You basically approve every single person and you can see all their answers and you can see their like LinkedIn page and their Facebook profile. So you kind of get a better sense of who they are. All right, awesome. I know, Mark, we're probably at time, but just wanted to thank everyone. And I will send the deck out. It's got some, actually, let me just pull up this last slides here, just so y'all know that they're going to be in there. There are a ton of resources. So I've got the actual customer discovery interview guide, which you can get. We've got a bunch of blog posts, obviously the book. And then if you do have any questions, like definitely email me if you want to chat or just have a quick question. Thank you all.
And I'm going to share one more screen for y'all. If I can find it here. There we go. Yet another survey. You can fill it out. Let us know what you think, or you could just message me and tell me. It's probably easier. No one ever fills these out. I don't know why I even give surveys. And then speakers. We are always looking for speakers. If you would love to give on a topic, we're looking for speakers who can focus in on more of an advanced topic and speak a little bit at length at it, as opposed to speaking very generally, which Rajesh, you did an amazing job tonight. Thank you so much. It was always a pleasure. Yeah, I think that's it for everyone. Thank you all. Have a great night. And if you ever want to talk to Rajesh more, go to Product Hired and sign up for coaching with them. And if you want, we can hang out more and network. I mean, I promise that afterwards. Anybody want to network, or you all looking for dinner?
Yeah, dinner.
Dinner? Okay. Well, then we'll call it a night. Take it easy, y'all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
See y'all.